Hello, Varlets. This build was supposed to be released on Halloween, but as you can tell, it is currently not Halloween anymore. You know, sometimes life gets in the way and I couldn't get this video out in time. But I decided that this video was fun. This build was fun and interesting enough that I wanted to release it anyway. So during Halloween, it's a spooky time. I wanted to create a thematic spooky build, and I was thinking about Axe Murderer meets Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Leatherface, and this is what became of it. The cosmetic store had that mask, that very strange mask that looked like leather, so I thought this was perfect. This was exactly what I wanted for the build. And so we ended up with the Chainaxe Bloodhunter. The Bloodhunter part is because of how we are specifically going to build this build. So, as a thematic build, this will be focused on either the idea itself or a particular weapon, and so the talent tree will be in service to that, which means I will explain the weapon choices first before going into the talent selections. Then everything will make sense after. So let's get right into it. For this build, we are going to go with the Mark 12 Orestes Assault Chainaxe. I like the Mark 12 simply because it's a very simple weapon to use. I am no expert in Chainaxes. Speaking of which, if you would like a more educational video and want to learn more in-depth knowledge about the Chainaxe class of weapons, I highly recommend my buddy Reginald's videos here. I'll link a couple of them in my description. But for this video, I have a very specific way I want to build the Chainaxes, and so it will deviate away from what you expect to see as meta or optimal build. My thematic builds care not for any of those. So, starting with the stats. The dumb stat of choice is going to be defense, because defense only affects your sprint cost and push cost. Important stuff, but not as important as the components in mobility, which I value more. The dodge distance especially, as well as sprint speed. Everything else you want to keep as high as possible. For perks, I have chosen carapace damage because this entire build's premise is being able to one-shot every elite in the game. And so carapace is going to be the toughest nut to crack, and that's why we're taking it. We are also going to pair this with elite damage to give us an overall boost against elites, because elites tend to be the more tougher enemies to kill rather than like specialists, for example, because you have things like what they call again, reapers and bulwarks to chew through, as well as maulers. Moving on to blessings, as you can see, I have Bloodletter here in my first slot. Before I get into it any further, I have tried both Hit Taker and Slaughterer. These are your meta pickups for just general horde clearing and making it an overall very effective killing machine. But for this build and the theme I'm following, I'm going to make use of Bloodletter. And the main reason why I want to use it is because this Bloodletter, specifically on the Chainaxe, is unique, because it hits the 16 maximum bleed stack cap immediately. The Chainsword hits 14 stacks and the Eviscerator hits 6, which is very pitiful. So given that it had such a powerful debuff that can be applied freely, I wanted to make use of it in this build. To pair with Bloodletter, I have chosen Thunderous, which allows us to apply up to 10% brittleness per hit to a maximum of 4 stacks, which is 40% brittleness. This combination of blessings allows us to just one-shot whatever elite we decided should not exist on the field anymore. And it also has some team play applications, because although enemies like Plague Ogryns, Chaos Spawns are unyielding armor, applying brittleness to them actually gives you a little bit of a damage boost. It's not significant, it's like 5.6% or something, but it is something that is better than nothing. And so we still see some use there. And yes, I have brought, as I said earlier, I have brought both Hit Taker, Slaughterer. I've messed around with Thunderous I've messed around with Hit Taker instead of Thunderous while still keeping Bloodletter. And the Chainaxe, to its credit, and Fat Shark buffing it in the last few patches has made it very, very effective, that really, whatever you take, it will be useful one way or another. It's just that I really wanted to focus on Bloodletter in this build, and that's why I've chosen Thunderous. You do you and take Slaughterer or Hit Taker, however you want to play it. But that is it for the Chainaxe build. Now we're going to move into the Flamer, which is thematically the most suitable weapon I could find for this build. What else is more terrifying in your horror flicks than a leather-face creature wielding a flamethrower that will damn you to hell? So for the flamethrower, we have mobility as our dump stat. The important things you want is that burn should not be lower than 76%. I've gone through this over in my Inferno Staff guide. The Inferno Staff and the Flamethrower have very, very much many things in common. And so the reason why you don't want it to be less than 76% is because the max damage over time stacks will be 14 instead of 15, and so you are limiting your damage potential by having it less than 76%. For everything else, as high as possible is good, more ammo is good. Cloud radius affects how far your flames will reach. I think right now it is 23 meters, so yeah, that's a very substantial range to have. And damage is just the direct damage you deal. For our perks, we are going with flag damage. This is for the same reason that I talked about in the Inferno stuff. Most enemies will die very quickly to your flames alone, and so we want to optimize for trying to kill enemies that have the health to take the damage, which is usually going to be maulers, since they have like, what, 3,000 health compared to something like a Rager, which only has 2,000. So we'll get more mileage out of flag damage than we would from Maniac, for example. But there's an argument for unyielding as well, because monsters have a lot of health. And with how this Flamer is built, you could absolutely make this into a boss melter by just switching out flag for unyielding. But in general, I like using flag because I deal with maulers more often than I do with bosses. Our next perk is going to be 5% crit chance. This is a very important 5% crit chance, unlike, say, my Cinder Mage, where that was really helpful for boosting and ramping up the damage. The 5% here will play a pivotal mathematical role, as we will see in a bit. For blessings, we are going with Everlasting Flame. This is honestly one of the most absurd blessings I've ever seen Fetch Rank release, and when I first saw it, I immediately thought, oh god, this is going to result in some crazy nonsense, isn't it? And sure enough, in my last dozen games or so with this build, it has resulted in you being able to perpetually spew flames until you run out of ammo. And so, because you can maintain your fire output for as long as you want, Blaze Away is just a natural pairing to have with it. If you're wondering whether Penetrating Flame will be better than, say, Blaze Away, the answer is no. 40% more power will exceed what 20% penetration will be beneficial for, with the exception of team play, because Bitterness applies to your entire, is a debuff on an enemy that applies to your entire team. So yeah, that is the Flamer. For Curios, I've gone with 1 max stamina blessing and 2 toughness. This will come in later in a bit, but for the rest of the perks, they are more or less the same. 5% toughness, 12% stamina regeneration, and 15% spin efficiency. Now, let's move on to the talent tree, which we will build to fit the theme of the Chainaxe Bloodhunter, as well as trying to make the most of our weapons and compensate for some weaknesses in the build. We are going to start off with Disdain. This is kind of useful for the Chainaxe actually, because you can naturally hit 5 Poxwalkers. You'll damage 3 of them, but you hit 5 of them. So that allows you to give every other attack a sizable damage boost, especially if you are wailing into a horde. We also take Anointed in Blood and Purge the Unclean. Both of these nodes just give you free damage. As we saw, the Flamethrower has a maximum range of 23 meters. Anointed in Blood maxes out at 30 meters, where it gives you 0% damage. So we will always be getting a damage boost as long as we are flaming something. And the closer they get to you, the more damage it deals. Purge the Unclean, free damage for unyielding, so good against monsters. The infested damage is useful for the Chainaxe, because if you are using that for, say, small groups of Poxwalkers, this will come in helpful, especially given that we don't have any damage buffs like Hit Taker or Slaughterer. Then we'll move on to the right, picking up Backstabber. We don't really need this, it's just in the way. But what we want is Scourge. So this is where one of the first interactions comes into play with Bloodletter. When you Bloodlet something, you immediately apply Bleed, and that means your next 3 attacks will max out Scourge buff, giving you a 30% chance, which allows you to continue maintaining that 16 stacks of bleed. So just this one node alone with Bloodletter allows you to maintain a very high single target damage output on something like, say, a captain or a monster. Very good synergy here. We then move down, taking up Enduring Faith for the extra damage reduction. Since this will be a critical centered build, we will also take Second Wind. This is very useful for dodging and dancing in between range enemies. And we will take Blades of Faith. This will compensate for the fact that we do not have the ability with our ranged weapon to deal with snipers, bombers, and flamers from too far away. We will then move all the way here to the left to pick up Duelists. Now, I could spend an entire video talking to you about the math that goes behind how Duelist works and why it is, in my opinion, one of the strongest talents in the entire game. But just believe me that Duelist changes up a lot of how Zealot plays and is responsible for the major power spikes that many Zealot builds have. But yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. We'll pick up Desperation, which I think is not a very good note because in general you do not want to be in a position where you do not have stamina. But we'll take this just so we can go quickly through Benediction down to Fury of the Faithful. This will be our main steroid for buffing up our Chainaxe, giving us extra attack speed, which is very useful for the Chainaxe. We don't really need the rending so much because of how powerful the Chainaxe is already with its shredder and how we've built it, since we also apply brittleness. But the extra crit is also very nice for bursting down a gunner, for example. That comes up quite a lot in my games, actually. We will also take Redoubled Zeal for more flexibility in being able to use Fury of the Faithful. We will then do a very standard Blazing Piety route, taking everything on the right side of the tree. Punishment is nice to have, not really that critical. Invocation of Death, excellent with any critical-centric build. Between Blazing Piety, Righteous Warrior, and Scourge, along with your base critical chance, you have a 60% critical chance for your Chainaxe, which means you will be activating Invocation of Death a lot, which also means you'll be getting back Fury of the Faithful a lot. And so that allows you to continue going on your massacre spree, running into one enemy after another. With the remaining 4 points, we are going to take Faithful Frenzy just for the extra attack speed boost, and Sustained Assault. This is basically like a poor man's hit taker, so that again compensates for the fact that we do not have hit taker on the weapon. That is the entirety of the talent tree that is built to service the loadout that we have here. Alright, now with both talents complete and weapon selections done, we can move on to the fun part, which is showing you some of the interesting interactions and tips and tricks you can apply with this build. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that some people really do not like the special attack of the Chainaxe or the Chain Swords or Eviscerators and Force Swords because they believe that it latches you onto the enemy and so you are stuck and forced to go through with the animation. They think that you are stuck having to do this. But in actuality, what you can do is just immediately dodge back to release. So let me just do that again. There. And observe, the Mauler has taken full stacks of bleed and has full brittleness applied just from getting one hit. That is the beauty of this build, in that you don't have to commit to apply the full damage output of it. The Bloodletter debuff is applied on the first impact, and so what you can do is just immediately dodge out of your first attack without draining too much stamina, applying full 16 stacks of bleed, and have it tick up the brittleness stacks. So the Mauler is going to be debuffed for the entirety duration of the bleed, which is I think is about 9.5 seconds or something like that, in addition to the 5 seconds of the brittleness applied. So just tapping an enemy once, and it could be a monster by the way, or a captain, or the twins, they will be debuffed for about 15 seconds with 40% brittleness. That is kind of crazy if you think about it, for having to do nothing else unless, as long as you have your Chainaxe out. Now, when it comes to lethality, what I want to demonstrate is how it can one-shot a Crusher on its own. If you land a headshot with a heavy attack, it will bleed out. No problem there. If the Crusher is fighting, just make it active, and you land a headshot, it is dead. Simple as. You can take down one of the most toughest armored enemies with this weapon in this setting here without having to use Fury of the Faithful or Thrust. So the ability to one-shot is entirely self-contained with the Chainaxe itself, which is nice. Something which I just showed with the Maulers, I'm gonna talk about it a little bit more here, is, let me just turn invisibility back on. Yes. So that single hit that you saw earlier and then dodging out, I lovingly call that a chomp, because you have a Chainaxe with teeth and it takes a bite out of the enemy. And as you can see, for something that isn't a Mauler or a Crusher, if they get chomped, they die. They are guaranteed to die. A Maniac Rager will die, will take down and die for sure. What's it called again? What are you again? Oh yeah, that's right. Scab Rager will die as well. It will tick up. You can see the damage actually increasing because of the brittleness stacks, and it will bleed to death. This is a very cool thing that you can do with this build because of the interaction between Bloodletter and Thunderous, and allows you to just really go around just chomping people or just shredding them into bits and pieces with the shredder attack, which is the whole point of this build. Now, of course, you could just mow them down with the light attacks. That will do exactly the same. No problem here. And because as you are pumping into them, so you're grinding into them. The bleed damage is continuously applying it to increase the bitterness stacks, which means the final burst damage from the Chainaxe is also increased thanks to the reduction in armor damage resist from the enemy. So that's a very cool interaction just for the Chainaxe alone, and it made it really fun to play with. Now, just to show you some of the effectiveness, I'm going to bring up some Poxwalkers here. 5 Poxwalkers. A single regular attack, okay, that actually damages 4 of them. Can hit 5 Poxwalkers, which means your horde clearing is already really decent with the spamming light attacks into a crowd. And so, really, the Chainaxe doesn't really feel weak just because you don't have Hit Taker or Slaughterer. It is absolutely manageable. It's definitely going to be stronger, but not necessary. Which is a great thing because it allows for such build diversity. Hello, this is Future Editing Raikon. One thing I forgot to add was about the Chainaxe's push attack, which is a stab. This stab has a tremendous amount of stagger force and does a respectable amount of damage. Hitting an enemy with this will break them out of their attack combo, and this includes Ogrin's overhead attacks. You don't even need to aim for the face, just hit them in the body in general and they will stop. Which is very helpful. That is all. The next thing I'm going to show is the Flamer. Yes, let's talk about that for a little bit. The reason why we want that 5% extra critical chance on this is because from a mathematical sense, it hits a certain equilibrium, if you will. I'm going to put up some footage of what the Flamer can do about here while I talk about the math, because that way it's more engaging. So between Blazing Piety at 25% crit chance, the Zealot's innate 5% crit chance, and the Flamer's 5%, we have 35% crit chance. So in other words, on average, every 3 ticks of ammo you spend, you should score a critical hit. Whenever you score a critical hit, Everlasting Flame returns 4 ammo into your magazine from your reserves. That means, with this amount of critical chance, every time you would spend 3 ammo, you get 4 back. That is 1 ammo surplus. And so, if you keep doing this over and over again, you actually start to gain more ammo back into your magazine than you can spend it. And that happens a lot, especially if you're dealing with hordes or burning down a monster, as you can see on screen, or saw on screen. I don't know if the Beast of Nurgle is dead yet or not. But that is why that 5% is there. It's so that we hit this critical threshold that makes a difference. And honestly, I've gotten numerous games where my Zealot has gotten the highest boss damage, monster damage, simply because I did not stop firing the flamethrower for the entirety duration until the monster died. That alone makes this flamethrower one of the most absurd things to ever step foot in Darktide, and I'm not complaining. I don't think it's... well, to say it's not OP would also be technically wrong. It's also in a way not broken because it is drawing ammo from your reserves, and so if you don't have reserve ammo, Everlasting Flame doesn't do anything for you either. But the sustained output with the damage it deals is just incredibly strong. So that was the Chainaxe Bloodhunter build. This is a very simple build that I came up with. I've actually never used the Chainaxe before up until recently when I came up with this build, and so I thought that for those of you who are still exploring how to use different builds or different weapons or just how to mess around with them, this might be a good video to actually get into it, just to thematically try something out. And that's what I like about theme builds. It encourages me to try things that isn't meta. How do I make something work when no one talks about it? And that's generally how I do all my builds all the time. Thank you all for watching. I hope you found this video useful, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.